They called the physician in first, the most expensive one in 3 counties, the man whose very presence was supposed to guarantee survival. He examined the Duke for less than 10 minutes before stepping into the corridor, his face carefully composed in that practiced expression of professional regret. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a diagnosis that allowed no argument. The poison has progressed too far. You should prepare the estate. But standing at the very back of the gathered household, a young kitchen maid named Iris Thorne felt something flicker inside her. Not hope exactly, but recognition. Because years ago, in a different life, in a cottage miles from any grand estate, her grandmother had shown her a remedy everyone else had long forgotten. And though Iris had spent the last 2 years invisible inside Ashford Hall, though she possessed no title, no training, no authority whatsoever, she suddenly understood with perfect clarity that if she remained silent now, the Duke would die by morning. 3 weeks earlier, everything had been different. Duke Rowan Ashford moved through his estate like a force of nature contained in human form, tall, composed, impossibly distant. He was 28 years old and had inherited Ashford Hall at 18 after his father's sudden death. In the decades since, he had transformed a crumbling legacy into one of the most efficiently managed estates in England. Props flourished. Tenants prospered. Every corridor gleamed. Yet the Duke himself remained unreachable. He was not cruel. Staff often remarked on his fairness. But he existed behind a wall of formality, so complete that even his closest advisors addressed him with rigid caution. He ate meals alone. He took no companion. He moved through rooms like a man convinced that distance protected everyone, including himself. Iris had been at Ashford Hall for 2 years, working in the kitchens where she prepared meals no one important ever noticed. She kept her head down, her voice quiet, her past carefully unmentioned. Because before she became a kitchen maid, she had been someone else entirely, a girl raised by a healer grandmother in the northern hills, taught remedies passed down through generations, knowledge that had no place inside a world of physicians and propriety. She noticed the Duke only in passing, a glimpse as he crossed the courtyard, his voice drifting through doorways during estate meetings. She never expected him to notice her at all. Then came the dinner. A foreign ambassador arrived with an entourage so large it strained even Ashford Hall's resources. The kitchens worked frantically, preparing elaborate courses meant to impress rather than nourish. Iris moved efficiently through the chaos, her hands steady as she arranged delicate pastries onto silver trays. She was carrying one such tray through the servants' corridor when she nearly collided with the Duke himself. He stepped back immediately, his expression unreadable. "Careful. Forgive me, Your Grace." She lowered her eyes, waiting to be dismissed. Instead, he paused. His gaze dropped to the tray she carried, then lifted to her face with unexpected focus. "You prepared these?" "Yes, Your Grace." Another pause. "They're remarkable." The compliment landed so unexpectedly that Iris forgot protocol long enough to meet his eyes. For one suspended moment, something passed between them. Not familiarity, but a flash of mutual recognition, as though they both glimpsed someone beneath the rules they'd been assigned. Then the Duke nodded once and continued past her, leaving Iris standing alone in the corridor, heart pounding inexplicably. After that night, she noticed him watching sometimes. Across crowded halls, through kitchen doorways left slightly ajar. Never obviously, never long enough to invite comment, but enough that she began to understand. The Duke was lonely in ways he would never admit, and somehow, impossibly, he had seen her. The poisoning happened during the ambassador's final banquet. Afterward, no one could determine precisely how the toxin entered the Duke's glass. The wine had been poured from a shared bottle, the goblets identical. Yet within an hour of the final toast, Duke Rowan Ashford collapsed in his study, convulsing violently before falling into a stillness more terrifying than any struggle. The physician arrived at dawn, examined him with infuriating calm, then delivered his verdict like a man pronouncing whether fatal, untreatable, a matter of hours at most. The household fractured immediately. Senior staff gathered in tight, whispering clusters. The ambassador's entourage was detained. Messengers rode frantically toward London. And through it all, the Duke lay motionless in his chambers, skin pale, breathing shallow, dying. Iris stood at the back of the corridor outside his rooms, listening as the physician explained to the Duke's steward that nothing more could be done. The words washed over her with nauseating familiarity because she had heard them before, years ago, when her grandmother had been the only one who knew how to save a child everyone else had given up for dead. The remedy was dangerous, obscure, prepared from a plant most people believed was only poison itself, never cure. Her grandmother had made Iris memorize it anyway, insisting some knowledge must survive even when the world stopped listening. "There's fever vine growing near the east woods," Iris heard herself say. Every face turned toward her. The physician's expression shifted into patronizing disdain. "Fever vine is toxic. In large amounts," Iris said quietly. "But prepared correctly, you're a kitchen maid." He dismissed her with a glance. "Leave medical matters to those qualified." The steward nodded agreement, already turning away. And Iris understood then, with perfect clarity, that she had one choice remaining: obey the hierarchy that demanded her silence, or risk everything to save a man who had seen her when no one else ever had. She looked once toward the Duke's closed door. Then she ran. The steward's shout followed Iris down the corridor, sharp with authority and disbelief, but she did not stop. She took the servants' staircase 2 steps at a time, her skirts gathered in trembling fists, ignoring the startled faces of maids and footmen who pressed themselves against the walls as she flew past. By the time she reached the kitchen, her lungs burned, but her mind had already begun calculating how much fever vine she would need, how long the preparation would take, how many minutes the Duke had left. The head cook blocked her path immediately. "What in God's name? I need the still room," Iris said, breathless. "Now, you'll do no such thing." The steward just sent word. Iris met her eyes with an intensity that stopped the older woman mid-sentence. "He's going to die. The physician has already given up. If I'm wrong, nothing changes. If I'm right." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The cook stared at her for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, inexplicably, she stepped aside. 10 minutes. After that, I never saw you." Iris didn't waste time on gratitude. The east woods were a quarter-mile from the kitchen gardens, accessible only through a narrow path servants used for foraging. Iris ran the entire distance, her heart hammering against her ribs as she searched the undergrowth with practiced eyes. Fever vine grew in shadow, its leaves a distinct silver green that caught light differently than surrounding plants. She found it growing beneath an oak, exactly where it should be. Her hands moved with the certainty her grandmother had drilled into her years ago. Select only mature leaves. Avoid the stem where toxins concentrated. Count precisely. 7 leaves. No more, never less. She wrapped them carefully in her apron and ran back toward the hall. The still room was blessedly empty. Iris worked with shaking hands but unwavering focus, grinding the leaves in a marble mortar, adding spring water in exact measure, heating the mixture over a low flame while counting seconds aloud to prevent overextraction. The scent rose bitter and sharp, nothing like medicine, everything like risk. When the preparation finally cooled to the correct temperature, Iris poured it into a small glass vial and turned to find the steward blocking the doorway. His face was flushed with anger. "You were ordered to stop." "The Duke is dying," Iris said steadily. "And you think you, a kitchen maid with no training, know better than a physician? I think my grandmother saved 6 people with this remedy before she died. I think the physician has already admitted he can do nothing. And I think if the Duke dies because I stayed silent, I'll never forgive myself." The steward's expression wavered. For a moment, Iris saw past his authority to the exhausted man beneath, someone who had served the Duke's family for 30 years, who was watching a young man he'd helped raise slip away without recourse. "If you're wrong," he said quietly, "they'll hang you for murder." "I know." Another pause. Then, incredibly, the steward stepped aside. "I'll take you to him. But the physician stays in the room. And if there's any sign of worsening." He didn't finish the threat. Iris followed him up the main staircase, her heart pounding so violently she thought the entire household must hear it. Servants pressed against walls as they passed, whispering frantically. Everyone knew by now that the kitchen maid had defied direct orders. Everyone understood what that meant. The Duke's chambers were crowded with anxious staff when they entered. The physician stood beside the bed, arms crossed in obvious disapproval. And on the bed itself, Duke Rowan Ashford lay motionless, his skin waxen, his breathing so shallow it barely moved his chest. Iris had prepared herself for many reactions. She had not prepared for the wave of grief that struck her seeing him like this. Powerful, untouchable Duke Ashford reduced to fragile mortality, dying alone despite the crowd surrounding him. "This is absurd," the physician said immediately. "She'll kill him faster." The steward ignored him, turning to Iris. "How much?" "Half now," Iris said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The rest in 2 hours if he survives the first dose." "If he survives," the physician repeated mockingly. Iris approached the bed slowly. Up close, the Duke looked even worse. Lips tinged blue, pulse visible and erratic at his throat. She slid one hand beneath his head, lifting gently, and brought the vial to his lips. "Please," she whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "Please let this work." The liquid slipped between his lips. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then his throat contracted in an automatic swallow. The room held its breath. 1 minute passed. 2. The physician checked his pulse, frowning. Heartbeats irregular. "It will be," Iris said. "The fever vine accelerates everything briefly before stabilizing." "Accelerates? You've induced crisis deliberately?" "I've given his body a chance to fight." 5 minutes. The Duke's breathing grew harsher, more labored. Several staff members exchanged horrified glances. The physician reached for the Duke's wrist again, and this time his expression shifted into alarm. "His pulse is racing." "This was a mistake. Wait," Iris said firmly. "I will not wait while you wait." Something in her voice, certainty, desperation, both, made him hesitate. The room fell silent except for the Duke's labored breathing and the clock's relentless ticking. 7 minutes. 8. Then, impossibly, the Duke's breathing eased. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but the terrible shallowness began to deepen, fraction by fraction, into something that resembled actual rest. The physician's hands stilled on the Duke's wrist. His frown deepened, but this time with confusion rather than condemnation. "The pulse is steadying." Iris closed her eyes briefly, relief flooding through her so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. 2 hours, she repeated hoarsely. Then the second dose. The physician looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Anger, maybe, or the beginning of unwilling respect. "If he worsens, he won't." She hoped desperately that was true. The longest 2 hours of Iris's life followed. She remained in the Duke's chambers despite the physician's obvious displeasure, watching every breath, every flicker of movement, terrified that each moment might be the one where everything went catastrophically wrong. But slowly, undeniably, color began returning to the Duke's face. His breathing continued steadying, and when she administered the second dose, he swallowed without assistance, some unconscious part of him already fighting back toward consciousness. By midnight, his eyes opened. The room erupted immediately, staff calling for water, for blankets, the physician pushing forward to examine him. But the Duke's gaze, unfocused and confused, drifted past all of them and landed directly on Iris. Their eyes met, and in that suspended moment, she saw the exact instant he recognized her. The Duke's recovery took 3 days, during which the entire estate existed in a strange, suspended state between relief and reckoning. The physician grudgingly admitted that Iris's remedy had succeeded where his expertise had failed, though he framed it carefully as unorthodox intervention rather than outright miracle. The steward quietly ensured no formal charges were brought against her for disobedience, and Iris herself returned to the kitchens, expecting to disappear back into obscurity now that the crisis had passed. But the Duke did not forget. On the 4th morning, a footman appeared in the kitchen with a summons. "Miss Thorne, His Grace requests your presence." The head cook's eyebrows rose. Several younger maids stopped working entirely to stare. Iris wiped her hands on her apron, heart suddenly racing, and followed the footman through corridors that felt different now, brighter somehow. Or perhaps she was simply allowing herself to see them clearly for the first time. The Duke waited in his private study rather than the formal receiving room. The choice felt significant, intimate. When Iris entered, he stood near the window, dressed simply, still pale but visibly stronger. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You saved my life," he said finally. "I'm glad the remedy worked, Your Grace." The physician told me you defied direct orders, that you risked execution. Iris met his gaze steadily. Yes. Why? The question hung between them, deceptively simple. Iris could have offered a dozen safe answers. Duty, compassion, instinct. But standing there, watching the Duke study her with an intensity that felt like being truly seen for the first time in years, she found herself offering truth instead. Because you noticed me once, she said quietly. In a corridor, over pastries. You looked at me like I was someone worth seeing. And I thought, if I let you die without trying, I'd lose the only person in this house who ever did that. The Duke's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something far more vulnerable. You remember that night. I remember everything about it. Silence settled again, but warmer this time, charged with acknowledgement. The Duke crossed the room slowly, stopping a careful distance away, close enough that Iris could see the lingering shadows beneath his eyes. My physician says your knowledge is extraordinary, he continued. That the remedy you used has been lost to formal medicine for generations. Where did you learn it? My grandmother. She was a healer in the northern hills before. Iris hesitated. Before people stopped trusting women who knew too much about plants and called it witchcraft instead of wisdom. Understanding flickered across his face. You've been hiding. Surviving, Iris corrected gently. There's no place for hedge healers in estates like this. So I learned to cook instead. And yet you revealed yourself anyway. For me, the words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Iris felt her carefully constructed walls trembling. I couldn't let you die, even knowing what it would cost you. Even then, the Duke studied her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Gratitude certainly, but something deeper too, something that made her pulse quicken. The world told you to stay silent, to trust authority, to accept that your knowledge had no value. He paused. But you chose courage instead of obedience. And in doing so, you revealed something everyone else had missed. What's that, Your Grace? That worth has nothing to do with title. The statement landed between them with quiet force. Iris felt tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes because no one in her entire life, had ever acknowledged what she'd spent years trying to prove to herself. That knowledge mattered. That she mattered. That the girl who'd learned remedies in a cottage was no less valuable than physicians trained in grand universities. I want to offer you a position, the Duke said carefully. Not in the kitchens. As a state healer, you would have access to the still room, resources, the ability to practice openly what you've been forced to hide. He paused. But more than that, I need to understand how I've been living in this house for 10 years and never saw you until 3 weeks ago. Iris's breath caught. Your Grace, Rowan, he interrupted quietly. When we're alone, please. I've spent a decade hiding behind formality. Nearly dying has a way of revealing how exhausting that becomes. Rowan. Iris repeated carefully, testing how his name felt in her mouth. It settled there comfortably, like something she'd been waiting to say. You saw me because you were ready to. And I saw you because I was brave enough to look. And now we're both standing here without pretense. Which is terrifying. He smiled then, a real smile, unguarded and warm. Terrifying, he agreed. But also relief. They stood in comfortable silence as morning light strengthened through the windows. Outside, the estate continued its careful routines, everyone performing their assigned roles with practiced precision. But inside this room, something fundamental had shifted. The physician is already furious that I'm considering this, Rowan admitted. He says it undermines proper medical authority. And what do you say? I say proper medical authority was prepared to let me die, while you, a kitchen maid with forbidden knowledge, saved me with a remedy the world tried to erase. His expression grew more serious. I've spent 10 years managing this estate by following every rule, respecting every hierarchy. But if I've learned anything these past days, it's that the world's rules nearly killed me. Your defiance saved me. I won't forget that distinction. Iris felt something loosen in her chest. Years of hiding, of making herself small, of believing that survival required invisibility. I accept the position. Good. Rowan's relief was visible. Though I should warn you, half the county will gossip mercilessly. A duke elevating a kitchen maid to a position of authority? Scandalous. Let them talk, Iris said with unexpected boldness. I spent 2 years being invisible. I'm not afraid of being seen anymore. His eyes held hers. Neither am I. 6 months later, Ashford Hall had transformed in ways no one had anticipated. The stillroom bustled daily with activity as Iris trained 2 apprentices in remedies long dismissed by formal physicians. Tenant families began arriving at the estate not just for food or work, but for healing that actually listened to their bodies rather than merely prescribing expensive, ineffective treatments. The physician initially threatened resignation, then grudgingly began consulting Iris on difficult cases, discovering that collaboration produced better outcomes than pride. And through it all, Rowan remained present in ways he never had before. He visited the stillroom frequently, ostensibly to review estate health matters, actually to simply be near Iris as she worked. They took walks through the east woods where fever vines still grew. They shared meals in his study, talking until candles burned low. And slowly, carefully, the distance between Duke and healer dissolved into something neither of them had expected to find: partnership, friendship, and eventually, love. The day Rowan proposed, spring rain tapped softly against the stillroom windows. Iris was grinding herds while he read aloud from a medical journal, their comfortable silence broken by his sudden, quiet voice. "Marry me." She looked up, more to forgotten. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, setting the journal aside. "I know it violates every social expectation. I know society will resist. But I've spent 10 years following rules that nearly destroyed me. I won't make that mistake with you." He crossed to where she stood. "You saved my life twice, Iris. Once with Fevervine. Once by teaching me that being seen is better than being safe." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes. Yes. Yes." He kissed her then, gentle and certain, and Iris felt every carefully constructed wall finally collapse into truth. The wedding 3 months later scandalized half the county and inspired the other half. But inside Ashford Hall, in a ceremony attended by servants and nobles alike, former kitchen maid Iris Thorne became Duchess of Ashford. And as she stood beside Rowan, hands joined, she understood something profound. Courage wasn't dramatic. Defiance. It was the quiet choice to speak when silence felt safer, to reveal yourself when hiding felt easier, to believe your knowledge had worth even when the world insisted otherwise. Years later, visitors to Ashford Hall would remark on the unusual warmth of the estate, the way the Duke and Duchess moved through their home, not as master and possession, but as true partners. They would notice the thriving stillroom where healing arts flourished openly. They would hear stories of the night a kitchen maid saved a duke's life with forbidden knowledge. But what they wouldn't see, what only those closest understood, was the deeper truth. Two people who had spent years invisible finally found each other by choosing courage over obedience. And in doing so, they proved that sometimes the greatest remedy isn't found in physicians' books or aristocratic tradition, but in the quiet wisdom of someone brave enough to remember what the world tried to forget.